Tonight on Frontline, long before the economic meltdown, the story of one woman who tried to warn about the threat to the financial system.
She saw something that people either had not seen or refused to see, and she tried to sound the warning. Nobody listened.
What are you trying to protect?
We're trying to protect the money of the American public.
I was told that she was irascible, difficult, stubborn, unreasonable.
Before the toxic assets poisoned the economy, she warned of their danger.
And that made her the enemy of a very, very large number of people.
She would fight an epic battle with one of the most powerful men in Washington.
He was, as George Bush put it at the time, a rock star.
It got pretty nasty pretty quickly. Greenspan turns to her, she turns to him. His face is red, and he's clearly quite upset.
A story from inside the highest levels of the Clinton administration.
They were all part of a very concerted effort to shut her up and to shut her down. And they did, in fact, shut her up and shut her down.
Tonight on Frontline, Alan Greenspan, Brooks Liborn, and The Warning.
What have you done to investigate the off-balance sheet transactions conducted by the Federal Reserve, which, according to Bloomberg, now total $9 trillion in the last 8 months?
I'll have to look specifically at that Bloomberg article. I'm not, I don't know if I have actually seen that particular one.
That's not the point. The question is, have you done any investigation or auditing of off-balance sheet transactions conducted by the Federal Reserve?
At this point, we're conducting our lending facility project at a fairly high level and have not gotten to a specific level of detail to really be in a position to respond to your question. To that particular.
Mr. Chairman, my time is up, but I have to tell you honestly, I am shocked to find out that nobody at the Federal Reserve, including the Inspector General, is keeping track of this.
Now, what if I told you that they are right to worry? That a catastrophe is not only coming, but it is a mathematical certainty.
First, it's obvious that this is the death of capital and money markets. There is no doubt about it.
So the unsustainability of the American and European economic systems is really quite clear and very real.
Hey, Mark.
A buying opportunity.
Mark, what's the end game here? Is it the collapse of Western civilization as we know it, the capitalist system? Where are we going here? How must it inevitably end, in your opinion?
I mean, you have a computer. Occasionally the computer will crash and then you have to reboot it. That will happen to the global economy.
Jerry Celente is one of the few people on the planet who predicted with uncanny accuracy and precision exactly what would happen to the United States economy in the fall of 2008. And now we hear prediction of what happening when, Jerry?
It's underway now. The timing is very difficult because these things are so manipulated, whether it's high-frequency trading, black pools, Madoffs or rip-offs. We know that there's a lot of behind-the-scenes manipulation going on. They want to make it appear that things are calm and everything's under control. It's not under control.
Are you really saying that we are coming to the end of the line no matter what because the changes won't be embraced? Or are you an optimist, and if so, on what basis?
Well, I don't consider myself to be an optimist, nor a pessimist. I like to think of myself as a realist. And realistically speaking, I think what you just said is correct, that the chances of there being a great awakening among the masses of the American people in time to avert some very serious consequences, the chances are small.
Far, but storm clouds on the horizon, a possible crash brewing, and it might actually even be worse than 2008. We've got the man who actually called the 2008 crash, and he's the author of The Real Crash, America's Coming Bankruptcy. Peter Schiff, here to tell us how this looks. Peter, In 2008, we had stocks collapse 60%. We saw banks going out of business. We saw unemployment spike. It was pretty ugly. You think this is going to be worse? How's it going to be worse? What's this look like?
Well, it's going to be a lot worse.
And this now poses huge dangers to the continent. We face the prospect of mass civil unrest, possibly even revolution, in some countries that are being driven into total and utter desperation.
These numbers, as very large as they are, vastly understate the problem of fraud.
Bill Black was in New York this week for a conference at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where scholars and journalists gathered to ask the question, how do they get away with it? Well, no one has asked that question more often than Bill Black. The former director of the Institute for Fraud Prevention now teaches economics and law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. During the savings and loan crisis, it was Black who accused then House Speaker Jim Wright and 5 U.S. senators, including John Glenn and John McCain, of doing favors for the S&Ls in exchange for contributions and other perks. The senators got off with a slap on the wrist, but so enraged was one of those bankers, Charles Keating, after whom the Senate's so-called Keating Five were named, he sent a memo that read in part, "Get Black, kill him dead." Metaphorically, of course. Of course. Now he's focused on an even greater scandal, and he spares no one, not even the president he worked hard to elect, Barack Obama. But his main target are the Wall Street barons who are heirs of an earlier generation whose scandalous rip-offs of wealth back in the 1930s earned them comparison to Al Capone and the mob, and the nickname Banksters. Bill Black, welcome to the Journal.
Thank you.
I was taken with your candor at the conference here in New York to hear you say that this crisis we're going through, this economic and financial meltdown, is driven by fraud. What's your definition of fraud?
Fraud is deceit. And the essence of fraud is I create trust in you, and then I betray that trust and get you to give me something of value. And as a result, there's no more effective acid against trust than fraud, especially fraud by top elites. And that's what we have.
It didn't take long for Bourne to learn that she and the chairman were not going to see eye to eye.
He said something to the effect of, well, Brooksley, we're never going to agree on fraud. And she said, well, what do you mean? And he said, you probably think there should be rules against it. She said, well, yes, I do. He said, you know, I think the market will figure it out and take care of the fraudsters.
The Alan Greenspan lunch, did it actually happen? Where he says...
I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to talk about it on camera.
Bourne is reluctant to speak about her meetings with Greenspan or others in the Clinton administration. Greenspan refused to speak to Frontline at all, but Bourne's advisors did.
Greenspan didn't believe that fraud was something that needed to be enforced, and he assumed she probably did. And of course she did. I've never met a financial regulator who didn't feel that fraud was part of their mission.
And this is an absolute stunner for the new head of this tiny agency, who is charged with making sure people don't commit fraud.
Well, I think she was taken aback about how far he would go towards deregulation, that even the notion that we should police fraudulent activity he didn't think was something that was a given.
That was her introduction to Alan Greenspan.